Hello and welcome to Indus News, live from Islamabad. I am Muneeb Hamid with the news of this hour. Let's begin with the top stories first. Pakistan has challenged India to present concrete evidence of Islamabad's involvement in the Jammu airport bombing. In a briefing, Interior Minister Sheikh Rashid condemned groundless accusations of the Indian Interior Ministry. Rashid said New Delhi tries to sabotage Islamabad's economic progress through terrorist attacks in Pakistan. Germany says there is no alternative to the two-state solution for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. German President Frank-Walter Steinmeier met his Israeli counterpart Reuven Rivlin in Jerusalem. In Haiti, at least 15 people have been killed in a shooting rampage in the capital Port-au-Prince. The National Police Chief says a journalist and a political activist were among the killed. He blamed allies of Phantom 509, a group of rebel police officers, for the shootout, but did not provide any evidence. Brazil has registered over 2,000 coronavirus-related deaths and more than 43,000 cases overnight. In Pakistan, the virus has claimed 40 more lives and infected over 1,000 people in the past 24 hours. Globally, there are 3.9 million deaths and more than 182 million cases. Well, these were the top stories. News in detail after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now let's have the news in detail. Pakistan has challenged India to present concrete evidence of Islamabad's involvement in the Jammu airport bombing. In a briefing, Interior Minister Sheikh Rashid condemned the Interior Ministry of India's groundless accusations.
Rashid said New Delhi tries to sabotage Islamabad's economic progress through terrorist attacks in Pakistan. He said Islamabad desires peaceful ties with India. However, peaceful resolution of the Kashmir issue in line with UN resolutions and aspirations of Kashmiris is a priority. He also said Pakistan's civil and military leadership supports reconciliation and peace in Afghanistan. Rashid said Islamabad won't allow its soil to be used against any other nation and won't allow Afghan soil to be used against Pakistan. On Pakistan-China ties, the Interior Minister said Pakistan seeks good ties with Europe and the US, but not at the cost of putting Beijing's interests at stake. Now, the Afghan government says its troops have thwarted a massive Taliban attack aimed at capturing the Ghorian district in Herat. The provincial governor said the Taliban gathered from different parts of the western province to attack the district. He said 20 fighters were killed during the clashes. The governor added security forces also neutralized a suicide car bomber before reaching the target. Afghan forces also claimed to retake control of Shinwari district in Parwan. Meanwhile, the Taliban say they have captured an Afghan military base in the Sayyadabad district of Maidan. Now, Germany says there is no alternative to the two-state solution for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. German President Frank-Walter met with his Israeli counterpart Reuven Rivlin in Jerusalem. Steinmeier said Iran must be prevented from acquiring nuclear weapons. A statement by his office says Steinmeier will hold talks with the new Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett. He will also meet alternate Prime Minister and Foreign Minister Yair Lapid, the statement added. Now, in Canada, remains of 182 more Indigenous children have been found at a former boarding school in British Columbia. This is the third such discovery in Canada in recent weeks. An Indigenous group, the Lower Kootenay Band, says the children were aged between 7 and 15. The group said it is believed the remains belong to bands of the Ktunaxa Nation and other First Nation peoples. The Lower Kootenay Band says it is too early to decide if these were former students of the school.
Indigenous leaders say they believe more graves will be found as investigations into the site of these schools continue. Also, nearly 500 people have died due to record-breaking heat over the last 5 days in British Columbia. The state's chief coroner, Lisa Lapointe, says the death toll will rise. British Columbia's Leighton town this week broke Canada's hottest temperature record 3 times. It now stands at 49.6 degrees Celsius. In the U.S., northwest temperatures in Washington and Oregon soared well above 38 degrees Celsius over the weekend. Portland set all-time highs several days in a row, reaching 47 degrees Celsius. Oregon has reported 63 deaths linked to the heat wave. Governor Kate Brown declared a state of emergency due to the imminent threat of wildfires, while the U.S. National Weather Service in Portland issued a red flag warning for parts of the state. The agency says wind conditions could spread fire quickly should one start. Now in Haiti, at least 15 people have been killed in a shooting rampage in the capital Port-au-Prince. The National Police Chief says a journalist and a political activist were among the killed. He blamed allies of Phantom 509, a group of rebel police officers, for the shootout, but did not provide any evidence. The chief said the shootings occurred just hours after a group member was slain in the same area. He said the police cannot tolerate these acts of reprisal in any form. Officials say the incident is still under investigation. Meanwhile, the U.S. has condemned the violence and urged Haiti to counter the increase in gang violence. Moving to Nigeria, where unidentified gunmen have killed a Zamfara state lawmaker in a rural area. Officials said Ahmed was driving from the state capital, Gusau, to the city of Kano in another state. Meanwhile, a state governor's convoy also came under fire in a separate incident that left 3 police officers injured. The situation in northwestern Nigeria has worsened, with hundreds of children abducted from schools this year for ransom. Now, Brazil has registered over 2,000 coronavirus-related deaths and more than 43,000 cases overnight. Globally, the virus has claimed more than 3.9 million lives and infected over 182 million. More about the pandemic in this report. Experts warn that the highly transmissible Delta variant is threatening progress made by the U.S. in fighting COVID-19. President Joe Biden has come up well short in his goal of delivering 80 million doses to the rest of the world by the end of June. Meanwhile, the Pan American Health Organization warns that the end of the pandemic is distant in most of Latin America and the Caribbean. In Brazil, far-right President Jair Bolsonaro said the Senate Commission investigating his conduct during the pandemic cannot touch him. But hundreds of Brazilians took to the streets to call for Bolsonaro's impeachment over what they call his genocidal pandemic policies.
That's $1 that Bolsonaro and the Ministry of Health wanted to earn on each vaccine bought, on the life of every Brazilian. We have more than 500,000 COVID-19 deaths in our country, and it is the result of the genocidal policy which revitalized the strength of coronavirus in our country.
Over in Asia, Thailand is reopening the holiday hotspot of Phuket to tourists quarantine-free, even as the country registered its highest daily death toll from COVID-19. Meanwhile, the Indonesian president has announced tougher social restrictions from July 3rd to 20th to stem a worrying spike. In Australia, significant numbers of new cases are being detected in New South Wales. The rising toll has raised fears of fresh clusters as the state reported a rise in new infections for a 3rd straight day.
Yesterday at 8 p.m, New South Wales had 24 cases of local community transmission. Half of those were cases that were exposed in the community. A number of those cases were people who were conducting work in the last few days, some with symptoms, and we can't continue to have that happen.
The World Bank says it will up funding for COVID-19 vaccine purchases and deployment to $20 billion. South Korea has also unveiled a supplementary budget of over $29 billion to offer pandemic relief to households, aid small businesses and create jobs. Meanwhile, in Pakistan, 40 more people have lost their lives to the COVID-19 in the last 24 hours. The Health Ministry says the death toll has crossed 22,000. The ministry said more than 1,000 people tested positive for the virus overnight. It said the caseload has exceeded 958,000, while over 904,000 have recovered. There are nearly 32,000 active cases in the country, of which over 1,800 are critical. Meanwhile, nearly 160 million doses of COVID-19 vaccine have been administered. Health Ministry data shows that more than 3 million people have been fully vaccinated. Moving on, now North Korea has vowed to boost relations with China. Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un says he wishes to take bilateral ties to a new strategic point. Kim sent a message to China's President Xi Jinping on the 100th anniversary of the Chinese Communist Party. He wrote that strengthening ties is a need of the hour and desired by people of both states. Kim said the pressure of hostile forces on the CPC is ineffective and can never undo China's progress. Now, China's President Xi Jinping has warned against anyone trying to oppress or bully his country. Xi addressed a ceremony to mark 100 years of the Chinese Communist Party. Celebrations at Tiananmen Square saw massive crowds with military jet fly past, cannon salutes and patriotic songs. The Chinese president said Beijing has never oppressed another country, nor will it ever do so. He pledged to complete the reunification with Taiwan and to smash any attempts to add formal independence for the island. Xi highlighted the role of the party in modern China and its central role in the country's growth.
100 years ago, the pioneers of communism in China established the Communist Party of China and developed the great founding spirit of the party, which is comprised of the following principles: upholding truth and ideals, staying true to our original aspiration, take on the historical mission, fighting bravely without fear of sacrifice, and remaining loyal to the party and faithful to the people. This spirit is the party's source of strength.
Well, Hong Kong is also marking its handover anniversary today. Well, now the Russian Navy has carried out live firing exercises in the Black Sea. The move comes amid ongoing Sea Breeze 21 exercises in the sea led by Ukraine, the US and NATO. In a statement, the Russian Navy said the crews of 2 large landing ships had fired at sea and air targets. Meanwhile, the Russian Defense Ministry says it is tracking an Italian Navy frigate that entered the Black Sea. The drill came 2 days after Russia tested its air defense systems in Crimea. Moscow had called for the exercise to be cancelled and said it will react to safeguard national security if necessary. Now in Ethiopia, rebels claim they forced the government troops to leave Tigray's capital, Mekelle. Earlier, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed said troops left the city because it was no longer the centre of gravity for conflict. A spokesperson for the Tigray People's Liberation Front termed Ahmed's comment a lie. He said the TPLF fighters bested security forces in what they called their own game. The spokesperson also said government-allied Eritrean troops have not withdrawn from the region. Earlier, a government official said the troops could return to Mekelle in weeks if needed. He also said Eritrean forces, which have been accused of abuses against civilians, had withdrawn from the region. Abiy's government has been battling the rebels since late last year. The United Nations says at least 350,000 people are facing famine and 5 million others need immediate food aid in the Restif region. Turkey says it is talking to Russia on the extension of a cross-border aid operation into war-torn Syria. Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu says the mandate must be extended beyond July 10th when it expires. Cavusoglu and his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov held a press conference in Antalya. Turkish minister said Ankara will continue to work with Moscow on a political solution to the Syrian crisis. He added the two will also coordinate on maintenance of an existing ceasefire in the north. For his part, Lavrov criticized the Syria Civilian Protection Act signed in 2020 by then US President Donald Trump. He said the illegal seizure of Syrian assets in foreign banks at the request of Washington is a total robbery. The Caesar Act contains the toughest sanctions ever against Syrian president in a bid to force him back to talks to end the country's war. Millions of people depend on the humanitarian aid funneled from a single border crossing between Turkey and northwest Syria. More news coming up in this news bulletin after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now, in the U.S., the death toll from a residential building collapse near Miami has risen to 18. 6 more bodies, including 2 children, were found overnight in the shattered ruins of the tower. The mayor of Miami-Dade County, Daniela Levine Cava, said 147 people are still unaccounted for. Cava added she would convene a grand jury to examine building safety. Nobody has been pulled alive from the debris since the condo came down on June 24th. Officials say they still hope to find survivors.
I've been a trauma surgeon for around 11 years, and this has been emotionally the most difficult thing I ever had to endure. I think a lot of us, including myself, a lot of our task force members who I work with are separated from these missing people by only 1 or 2 degrees.
Well, investigators have not yet concluded what caused the collapse. President Joe Biden and his wife are likely to visit the site on Thursday. Now moving to Sudan, where hundreds took to the streets to demand the transitional government's resignation over economic reforms. The reforms backed by the International Monetary Fund slashed subsidies on petrol and diesel, more than doubling their price. Protesters amassed outside the presidential palace in Khartoum and rejected the IMF-led policies. Earlier, the IMF approved a $2.5 billion loan and debt relief deal with Sudan. Meanwhile, Sudanese authorities said they arrested around 200 members of the former ruling party. Officials accused them of plotting acts of destruction. Now, Kuwait has launched its first indigenously built artificial Earth satellite into space. In a statement, the orbital space company chief said the satellite weighs 1 kilogram with a volume of 10 cubic centimeters. He said the Qamar al-Kuwait is considered as an educational satellite with micro or nanometric dimensions. The chief added the launch was carried out on a Falcon 9 vehicle from the site at Cape Canaveral. The orbital space company is the Arab world's first nano satellites launch company. Now, a prototype of a flying car completed its first intercity flight between the 2 Slovak airports.
The air car took off from Nitra Airport in western Slovakia and landed 35 minutes later in the capital, Bratislava. The prototype can transform itself from a road vehicle to a plane in 3 minutes by extending its foldable wings and retractable tail. Clean Vision, the company that developed the prototype, said it was the car's 142-second successful landing. The company said that Aircar has completed over 40 hours of test flights so far. The car has flown at 2,500 meters and reached a maximum cruising speed of 190 kilometers per hour. Aircar's second prototype is expected to reach a cruise speed of 300 kilometers.
Now, the United Kingdom is introducing new regulations to help defend its steel industry. This follows a recommendation from the newly established Trade Remedies Authority to scrap some quotas on imports. Trade Minister Liz Truss says London only had the option of accepting or rejecting the recommendations in full. She said quotas and tariffs will be retained for 10 categories of steel for 3 years and revoked in 9 others. But Truss said imports outside the quotas will face a tariff of 25%. The European Union introduced quotas in 2019 when Britain was still in the bloc. It was a bid to guard against steel shipments normally destined for the US being redirected to Europe. European markets have advanced as investors anticipate the continent's economic recovery. London's FTSE is leading the gains, rising over 1%. Italy's FTSE MIB and Frankfurt's DAX have also added close to 1%. The CAC 40 in Paris and the pan-European stocks 600 have gained over 0.5% as well. Earlier, Asian markets fell after a private survey showed that Chinese factory activity growth slowed in June. Now let's have a look at how the weather is doing around the world. Well, that is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.news.